6:31, welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Angela.
Let's take a look at today's front pages, and we've got two super guests with us. We're going to start with Jeremy Hunt in the Mail today. He's saying it is time to stop talking Britain down, as he will set out his plan for growth a bit later this morning.
The Telegraph says Nicola Sturgeon's trans law is in disarray after she was forced to announce that the offender, Isla Bryson, will have to stay in a male prison.
While the Mirror leads with legendary singer Sir Rod Stewart launching an attack on the Tories over their handling of the NHS.
In the Sun, Top Gear presenter Freddie Flintoff has put his TV career on hold after pleas from his family following a horror car crash.
While The Guardian reports that Windrush campaigners have described the government's decision to drop crucial reform commitments as a slap in the face.
OK, let's go through some of those then with political commentator Benedict Spence and legendary broadcaster Liz Kershaw. Good morning to you both.
Morning, both. We're starting with you. We're looking at Jeremy Hunt on the front page, aren't we, I think, Benedict?
On the front page of The Express and also of The Mail, where he has been told by members of his party to stop being so downbeat, to stop being so negative about the future of the UK and about the economic forecasts. And, of course, we all know that we're facing a very difficult year, and that's part of the knock-on from everything from Ukraine and the pandemic and 10 years of missed growth in this country, and it's sort of, I understand why this is coming along. There's this idea that the Tory party is sort of in a bit of a terminal decline, and if you constantly talking everything down, then that sort of feeds into the sense of spiralling. It is difficult to see how you can justify just sort of changing your mindset towards the economy and magically it'll grow. But in the Express, Ian Duncan Smith is saying that Jeremy Hunt should change his outlook, change his economic forecast, which, again, Mr. Sunak and Mr. Hunt came in off the back of a slightly bumpy ride where under Liz Truss, and they did have to put their... Yes, it's early in the morning, and I'm sort of restraining myself. And their job was to put a firm hand on the tiller and sort of just get things under control rather than sort of go for growth or anything like that. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that actually they inherited a very bad economic situation. It's still not actually a very good one. But this is what Ian Duncan Smith wants. He wants them to be a little more proactive, a little more upbeat, and presumably he thinks that the rest of the country will follow suit.
I love one of the quotes, sorry, just 1 second. One of the quotes that Mr. Hunt is going to give today is that he's looking at long-term prosperity based on British genius and British hard work.
It's a nice thought. It'd be nice to see it reflected in the Tory party. They would start there. That would be good.
What do you think, Liz?
I agree that British ingenuity is the way forward. He says he's going to support the creative sector. That's something that is, world-beating. When you think about, because of the advantage of the English language throughout the world, then our literature, our films, our TV programmes, our music is often sniffed at, pop, trivial, worth millions and billions, and the soft power influence it has as well. I think it's great that it's going to encourage that. What I just feel is that apparently it's going to consult Mel Stride, who's been Treasury Minister and Common Select Committee for donkey's years now. One of the things, Napoleon called us a nation of shopkeepers, and one of the ways that Britain can thrive and grow, growth is what we're after, and be more productive, is to encourage entrepreneurialism and start-ups and individuals having a great idea and turning it into a business and making money and employing people, not just in the creative sector, but, think of Dyson, James Dyson, and he had great technical ideas, but people need help. One of the things that's been going on in this country for the last 10, 15 years is the attack on the self-employed through the taxation system. Eamon's been a famous victim of it as well, and this thing called IR35, where you're actually drilling down on people who are taking risks and being self-sufficient. I think that they need to be honest about that and have an overhaul of that, because the other factor at the moment is that the over 50s are dropping out of the workplace in the droves.
But he wants them all back.
He wants them back. You've got to give people incentives. There's a lot of people who are sitting at home and thinking, I am not going out to work anymore because I am sick of being penalised by the tax
I mean,
system.
Kwarteng, as Chancellor, was scrapping the IR35.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
But that was obviously reversed then when he was out of office, because they want the money.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, but we have got such a low productivity rate in this country. But as I always say, always banging on about this, let's get it into perspective. It's a lot worse in France. It is a lot worse in France.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting to point out because one of the things that is going to be addressed in Jeremy Hunt's speech about the future of growth in this country is EU regulations. Is the fact that we haven't got rid of as many EU regulations as perhaps some people might imagine, given that we've got Brexit done. We're still sort of beholden to thousands of these things, and that's one of the key things is about cutting red tape for entrepreneurs, for businesses, and the sort of the hangover from the period of EU membership is still there, and that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. I just think it's the headline of the day.
Yeah.
We are failing.
We are failing.
Rod Stewart in the Mirror.
Well, my Rod song that immediately came to mind is I Don't Want to Talk About It. Well, quite clearly he does. And he sort of photobombed in an audio way Sky News last night by calling in. And, I love Rod Stewart. I love his music. I've always loved his sort of laddish, ordinary guy in the pub attitude. I'd love to go out for a pint with Rod Stewart. So he's a caring guy, and he really is upset about what's going on in the NHS. Just again, an aside, put it into perspective, not all hospital trusts are affected by these strikes. My hairdresser yesterday was going to pick up her daughter, who's a nurse at Milton Keynes Hospital. There's no nurses or ambulance or anything on strike in that trust.
I was in Preston 2 days ago, filming there at the Royal Preston Hospital. Everybody was on site.
Yeah, and so it's not nationwide. So let's just be real about that. But the NHS is in a mess. One of the things about productivity is a healthy population, a healthy workforce. The Labour Party didn't introduce the National Health Service in 1948 for truly altruistic reasons. They did it because we needed to dig ourselves out of the pit after the war, and you couldn't do that if people were suffering from terrible lung conditions or the after effects of war. They needed a healthy population. We need a healthy population, and we spend billions. I read the other day we're now spending 130 billion more on the NHS than we were a couple of decades ago. So what's going wrong?
Who's getting that money? It doesn't seem to be going to the frontline staff.
It's poor management. And what amazes me in all this business about nurses and doctors and ambulance drivers and everybody down to the cooks and the porters wanting better wages. Everybody said the government needs to sort this out. More than half of the NHS workforce are management and administration. So why aren't they doing their job and sorting out the pay and conditions of their workforce?
We'll be this a bit later in the programme, won't we?
We're going to. In terms of Rod, is it wrong for me to point out that, he's sort of saying we're failing, we need more money in the system, all the rest of it. He moved abroad in 1975 because he didn't want to pay the top rate of tax.
Well, we are failing. We are sailing. He famously left with Brit Eklund to avoid the top tax rate. Loads of musicians did. The Rolling Stones did it when tax was 98% under Harold Wilson's government, and famously Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin, he was on the Led Zeppelin private jet or something. He urgently needed something like an appendectomy, and he couldn't land in Britain to go into hospital because he'd immediately have to pay a huge tax bill.
Let's take away from Rod the fact that he's come up to the mark.
Oh,
and
potholes!
Do it.
Potholes.
It also makes you wonder who could possibly be watching. You never know who's going to be watching you. So you're just there. You're presenting Sky News. You're the producer back, and then suddenly you get a call from Rod Stewart, and you think,
"Yeah, hello, we're going to take this one."
Well, if
you want to be watching Sky News.
If you're already not stars watching this morning, who would you most like to phone in, Stephen?
If you consider yourself famous, please do write in.
Well, in the meantime, Benedict, you've been looking at what's happening about Nadeem Sultan.
Oh yes. Away from all the fun and games, it's back to the magnificence of the situation in government, and it's getting incredibly embarrassing now. Actually, the fact of the matter is Nadim Zahawi, former Chancellor, let's continue to remind ourselves, has given very briefly, but nonetheless
Long enough to do major damage.
sort of Berlusconi levels of chutzpah to, if you know that you have some tax issues in your past, to sort of elevate yourself to that position, given the circumstances, even if for a few weeks. I think that that's an incredibly bold thing to have done. Anyway, he's given permission for HMRC to go through his tax history. He clearly therefore feels that he hasn't done anything wrong.
He's given permission. I don't think HMRC needs our permission.
Well, this is how it's being framed, because of course he wants to put the record straight and say that I've done nothing wrong. But of course the problem is that the damage is done. The chief executive of HMRC has said you don't get penalties for making innocent mistakes. That's not how it works. And this is, as you say, the damage is done. It's very embarrassing actually that no firm action has been taken either from Rishi Sunak in saying thanks but off you go, or from Mr. Zahawi himself, who I have to say actually was one of the few ministers who emerged from the Boris Johnson administration, if not with his reputation enhanced because of the vaccines, then at the very least just about intact. He was one of the few, I think, that people were looking at and going, actually he's done a fair whack, he's done a fair job. So for Mr. Zahawi to...
as a potential leader.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we forget, of course, he got the job of Chancellor because everybody thought it would be absolutely fatal to Boris Johnson if he too resigned from his position as, I think it was Education Minister at the time. So he was a big beast. I think it's just a matter of months ago he was seen as pivotal to the future of that government. And now here we are. Really, he's too toxic, I think. Whatever he believes, whether he's done any wrongdoing or not, whatever HMRC actually believes ultimately, whatever the findings are, you cannot be a senior Tory minister and former Chancellor and be sat there with question marks over millions of pounds of tax against your name. It's just not possible to come back, I think.
Bearing in mind the damage he has therefore done to his own reputation and the damage that is being done to Rishi Sunak at the moment, which we were talking about by the extension.
Exactly.
At what point does a minister have to say, I'm going to take the honourable decision and step back from this and resign, without waiting to be pushed off the cliff?
Frequently it should happen much, much sooner than it seems to happen these days. I know that we all get a bit nostalgic every now and then, but there did once upon a time seem to be a point where ministers, because they were pushed earlier or because they had some sense of duty, would step aside earlier, not just entirely for altruistic reasons. They understand that they're doing more damage to their own careers if they sort of keep the headlines going. But this seems to be a very different way of thinking now in government, which is if you can, Boris Johnson, hang on like a tick, maybe you'll get away with it. Maybe you'll just survive until the next crisis, which isn't a particularly healthy way to run a government, but that is the government that we currently have.
So is the consensus, can I just ask both of you, because Liz, we're coming to you next, is he going to go? And is it going to be later rather than sooner?
Well, I would say in this country, you're innocent until proved guilty, and I'm not here to defend him. And I would say the reason people hang on is because the calibre of the pool to choose from is really rather poor. So who else do you go to? But questions are being asked, and they're being asked by a body, a person that was set up by Rishi Sunak at the behest of the Labour Party, etc., to investigate incidents like this, and that's what's currently happening. So I think we should wait for the outcome of that. Let's hope it's sooner rather than later. And meanwhile, the British public isn't being served well by all this fixation on one man and his tax return, because I had to switch to foreign news channels on the television this week to find out what's actually going on in the world once again, because the agenda on the main bulletins, on the main channels, is just psychotically fixating on this, and there are bigger things.
There are some stories like the Dominic Raab bullying stories that I do kind of look at and think, is there really that much here? It seems to be quite sort of low-hanging allegations. But I do think actually, when the tax burden is at its highest in sort of living memory, it is not unfair for people to fixate on a government minister in charge of, in some ways, making those decisions, or at least has oversight on them, not potentially paying his fair share.
But the other headlines have been about Nicola Sturgeon, haven't they? And that's one that's caught your eye this morning.
See, can I just say, this worries me because I think it's such a nuanced subject.
The transgender...
The trans issue, and they're talking about this rapist who claims to be a woman who is now being moved to a male prison.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to bear in mind with this rapist only decided that they were transitioning after they'd been accused of rape.
Yeah, and some people are saying that's a convenient tool because they thought, oh, I'll turn into a woman with a wig and a nice padded ski jacket and all the visual attributes of being female, but that'll get me a softer ride if I'm convicted. So that's one argument.
Yeah.
The thing is that you have to go back and ask yourself, why do we have male and female prisons? Why? I don't know. I've never asked the prison service. Well, it's presumably some kind of stop everybody getting it on while they're in jail and to protect people. It's still the sexual abuse in all male prisons and the sexual abuse in all female prisons. But to put somebody who's been shown to be violently sexual into a place where it's hard to say this without offending people at this hour of the day, but where he's got male parts and he could perform a penetrative act, which is rape, in the confines of a prison. It's like putting a fox among the chickens, some would say. The thing about the story, though, is Nicola Sturgeon's place in it all. Did she know? Was she consulted by the Scottish Prison Service? It's saying in the Times, when you go inside the paper, it's inconceivable that the Scottish Prison Service would have made a decision of this kind without consulting ministers. Maybe not the First Minister, but ministers. Anyway, she's now backtracked, but she still refuses to say whether she thinks this individual is a man or a woman, is male or female.
But that's where the self-determination thing comes.
Well, that's why it's calling out the whole policy that she's introduced in Scotland of self-determination, where you don't need medical examination, assessment into question. I mean, it's like school. Somebody pointed out yesterday, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. If she brings it down to 16, and most people are in education now until they're 18, you don't need your parents' consent. You can go into school and you can go into a girls' school, and you can say, actually, I'm not a girl anymore. And then what does the school do?
Yeah, well, there are questions that need to be answered. Look, we've got to leave it there. Liz, Benedict, thank you both very much indeed. We'll see you a little bit later on.
Yep.